I was a typical suburban kid. I loved to hang out with my friends on weekends and after school. I was so into sports, and I was involved in my Jewish community. Probably the only difference between me and a lot of my peers is that I was in love with my best friend, and he never knew it. Alex and I hung out after school together, we played sports together, so it wasn't your typical high school romantic comedy. While I'm not here to tell you that story today, what I sadly did internalize from my relationship with Alex was that I could never be who I truly was with the worlds that I lived within growing up. Whether it was the Jewish world, the sports world, or just being a typical suburban kid. I didn't think to actually challenge that notion until I was 20 years old. I was reconnecting with an old friend who I had grown up with and gone to Chabad Jewish Day School with. Rachel was telling me how her life had changed in DC where she went to school, and I was telling her how my life had changed where I went to school at UMass Amherst. About halfway through the conversation, Rachel paused, looked around the coffee shop, told me she had a secret to reveal, that she had started dating women. In that moment, I froze. I knew for the first time that I would reveal my biggest secret to somebody. My heart was racing. I looked around the coffee shop, also made sure nobody else was listening, and told Rachel that I was in love with a guy. What Rachel did in that moment was she gave me the access, the keys per se, to launching and starting my coming out story. She would become a great resource for me over the next few years. I remember the first time I went down to DC and visited her. We were going out to a gay bar, my first time. We got in a taxi cab, and there was one guy on my left, one guy on my right, one hand on my left thigh, and one hand on my right thigh. And I was like a frozen icicle. All of these emotions were going through me of happiness and fear, confusion. I really had no idea what that night would bring. But what I did know was it would be among the first opportunities I ever had to explore who I truly was and make friends and build community. Rachel represented just one of the worlds that I grew up within, the Jewish one. Yet I was so into sports, at hockey and baseball practices all the time, and among the common vernacular in the locker room were tons of homophobic slurs. And while others used them to joke around with each other, for me, they were like rocks being thrown left and right. That forced me even further back into the closet. Yet I love sports, the camaraderie, the teamwork, the competition. I was hopeful that someday in a different setting, it might change. So when I got to college, I majored in sport management, started working in the athletic department with my boss, John, who I had hoped would kind of signal that change in the sports world. Yet what stood out about John the most was when he mocked me for missing Friday night games, or when I had to miss an assignment for a holiday. He always said I needed to figure out that Jewish stuff if I was going to be a real sports professional. Thankfully, John was not my only sports mentor in my life at that time. About halfway through college, I met Lori, one of the most inspirational people I'd ever come across. And in the first few weeks of being my professor, she gave a lecture on homophobia in sports, which she had experienced her entire life, being cut from teams, cast out, forced back into the closet. It was like she was telling my story in front of the entire class. I was shocked. Our relationship continued into the next semester as she became my thesis advisor. Lori was an athletic director at a nearby university, and while there was certainly academic merit to what we discussed, what stood out most to me was the day Lori turned around and said, "Ethan, I think you're actually homophobic against yourself, and that's what's stunting some of your coming out." Homophobic against myself? What was she talking about? It was everybody else who had been forcing me further back into the closet. What Lori helped show me in that moment was that I didn't need to perform anybody else's act or understanding of what it meant to be gay through my words or my actions. I didn't need to subscribe to societal stereotypes of what it meant to be a gay man in the sports world. What Lori did was she gave me the access to owning my own sense of self, my own being. Lori and Rachel gave me some levels of momentum, but I really was not out to anybody else. I had no gay friends or community, and so the only inclusive place I knew where to go next was Hillel, the place where all of my friends were, where I spent many Friday nights, had the opportunity to lead several different organizations. And as I talked with the Hillel director about what could potentially be next in my coming out, I mentioned that there was a conference for queer Jewish college students that Rachel had invited me to. Rabbi Saul said I absolutely should go. I kind of embarrassingly turned to him and said, "I can't really afford to go, Rabbi." That day, he took out his Hillel checkbook and he paid for my flight. I went down to DC and it changed my life. I met people who grew up like me, who struggled with similar things, who were both stereotypically gay and non-stereotypically gay. And as I came back to UMass with all of this momentum, I literally ran to Rabbi Saul's office and wanted to have this grand coming out. And he said, "Why don't you do it at Hillel? Give a talk about being gay and being Jewish." At Hillel, the place that knew straight Ethan, where all of my Orthodox friends were, would everyone accept me? He said, "Well, it would be empowering for you, but it could potentially help somebody else and others who are living with closeted identities." And that's what got me, that I could help others. I gave that speech, and it was the launching point to so many magical things my senior year, of coming out and making friends and building community, started dating, and thinking about what was the next step in my life, where I was going to go to graduate school. And my decision where to go geographically was majorly decided by where I thought I could explore what it was like to be gay and so many other things. A son, a brother, a Jew, an athlete. I was thankful to have the opportunity to attend Boston University. And of course, among the first places I was about to go was BU Hillel. UMass one was so empowering for me. I went into BU Hillel, tried to start a gay and Jewish club. I got a few awkward stares, ignored by a few people. I thought, hey, maybe people didn't know who I was or weren't super comfortable with the idea of a gay and Jewish club. But we pushed through, and the first program, we brought in the author of the book, God vs. Gay. I remember going up to the Hillel director that night. I said, "Rabbi, it would be really important for me if you would come up and hear what this author has to say." He turned to me. He said, "Yeah, I have some really interesting questions to ask those gay people about how they live their lives." I knew in that moment that BU Hillel was not going to be what UMass Hillel was, and I had to go elsewhere. I was so sad that the Hillel, which was such an accepting place for me, had suddenly become a place that was rejecting me. So I went out into Boston, and I joined gay sports leagues where we were gay on the field and gay off the field. I started working for an organization that put on retreats for queer Jewish college students. And as I was coming out of graduate school and deciding what I wanted to do with my life, I knew I wanted to work with college students, help impact their lives, the same way my life was in college. And so as I was applying to jobs, there it was one day. The director of student life at Boston University, Hillel. I passed by it at first, but in the days and weeks to come, I could not get it off of my mind. What had thousands of other students experienced, I thought, if their lives were anything like mine? I did some research, and through the grapevine, heard that there was a new director at BU Hillel, and that the Hillel was moving in a new direction, and that made me apply. I went to the interview, immediately outed myself as a gay man, and I was pleasantly surprised to hear that the new director wanted to build a Hillel that was inclusive and welcoming. We talked about the cultural changes that needed to be made with student programs and the financial ones at a place that had been challenged for so long. And so when he offered me the job, I took it. I walked up to the door that day, and I had the keys in my hand to this place that had rejected me, literally. I walked in, And I found out a couple of interesting things those first few weeks. One was that the student hiring committee vocally said they did not want somebody like me hired. Second, that the former Hillel director had told all of the other staff that I was a gay recruiter, there to turn people gay. Like, that's not a thing. The new director and I knew we had our challenges in front of us. But imagine coming to work every day where people not only disagree with your professional decisions, but blatantly reject who you are. Over the next couple of years, I would have the opportunity to step up and step in at a Hillel that was culturally and financially challenged. I'm thankful to say that today I work with some of the most caring and loving Hillel professionals I've ever come across, who have brought so much vitality to Boston University Hillel. It was because of Rachel and Lori and Rabbi Saul that helped me understand that I was good enough just the way I was, that I didn't need to change to be accepted, and nobody else did. It was because of also the mentors that I met throughout my time at Hillel, and even because of several in this room today that helped show me that everybody deserved the keys to the car, that it didn't matter what your skin color is, or if your parents' bank account is at a certain level, or if your sexual orientation or gender identity merge with everybody else's. We are good enough just the way we are. You see, we at Hillel have great power. The UMass Hillel experience was so powerful for me in a positive way, and the BU one was so powerful for me in a different way. Collectively, we meet with thousands of students every single day. Imagine if we actually understood the long-term impact that our words and actions have on their lives, whether it's a word of welcome, the approval of a program, or taking out a checkbook and helping somebody get to a conference. Along with thousands of students, we have thousands of tasks on our to-do list. And the truth is that when a student comes into our office for a seemingly mundane task like a flyer approval or a space request, we really have no idea what else they're bringing to the table. I wonder, even for myself, what it would be like if nothing else mattered in those moments, other than being radically present. If no measurement or report or donor was more important than that student, and we were able to be curious and generous. That's what my mentors did for me, and they never even knew that they changed my life. Sometimes we need to grab the keys off the wall, give access to so many others, get in the car with them, and start driving down the road to change.